My father's eyes never left mine when he delivered the news that would destroy everything I'd built for the past 12 years. The boardroom was packed with investors, executives, and department heads, people who had watched me transform his struggling tech startup into a $75 million empire. And his voice carried that same proud tone he used when announcing quarterly earnings. "Your brother will take over as CEO effective immediately," he said, gesturing toward Marcus, who sat slouched in the corner chair like he'd been expecting this moment his entire life. The room went completely silent except for the hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic 22 floors below, and I felt my hands go numb against the polished table surface. Marcus hadn't worked a single day at the company, hadn't attended a board meeting, hadn't even visited the office in 3 years, but there he was, straightening his tie and accepting congratulations from executives who had been reporting to me since they were hired. I watched my father's mouth move as he explained the transition timeline, but all I could hear was the sound of my own breathing and the realization that I had just been erased from my own life's work. My name is Alara Voss, and I used to believe that hard work was enough. Before that boardroom meeting destroyed my world, I had a routine that made me feel invincible. Every morning at 5:47 a.m., I'd sit in my small kitchen with a cup of black coffee, reviewing quarterly reports while the city was still dark outside my downtown apartment. The numbers told a story I was proud of: revenue growth, market expansion, employee satisfaction scores that kept climbing year after year. I'd built something real from almost nothing. The office was my second home, a converted warehouse space in the tech district where I'd personally hired every single person on our 180-person team. Walking through those open-plan floors felt like moving through a machine I'd designed and perfected. The software engineers knew they could interrupt me anytime with problems. The sales team would wave me over to celebrate closed deals. Even the security guard, Ramon, would save me the good crossword puzzles from the morning paper. But it was the small conference room on the 3rd floor where I felt most like myself. That's where I'd meet with department heads every Tuesday morning, surrounded by whiteboards covered in my handwriting, strategic plans, growth projections, solutions to problems that kept other companies awake at night. I had this old mechanical pencil from college, a beat-up pen tool that still worked perfectly after 15 years. I'd click it against the table when I was thinking, and somehow that tiny sound helped me see through complex problems to simple solutions. At home, I kept a photo on my kitchen counter, me at 24, shaking hands with my father after my first successful client presentation. Back then, his company was bleeding money, and I was fresh out of Stanford with more theories than experience. But I believed I could save it, and more than that, I believed he wanted me to. If this story hits home, make sure you're subscribed. We tell these for a reason. The signs were always there, but I chose not to see them. The first crack appeared 3 years ago during our annual investor meeting at the Marriott downtown. I'd spent weeks preparing the presentation, complete with interactive demos and 5-year projections that had our biggest investors nodding in approval. But when the Q&A started, my father kept redirecting questions to himself, speaking over my answers and explaining concepts I developed as if they were his ideas. One investor asked me directly about our expansion strategy for the Asian markets, and before I could respond, Dad jumped in with some generic talking points that missed the nuance entirely. I sat there watching him fumble through my research, my jaw clenched so tight I thought my teeth might crack. The second moment happened 8 months later in our legal department. I was reviewing acquisition contracts with our corporate attorney, Maria Santos, when she mentioned something that stopped me cold. She said she'd been instructed to add Marcus to all major contracts as a secondary signatory, even though he held no official position in the company. When I asked who gave that instruction, she looked uncomfortable and said it came directly from the board. I walked straight to my father's office, but he was in meetings all day. The next morning, when I finally confronted him, he brushed it off as a precaution, something about succession planning and family business continuity. He said it like it was boring paperwork, not like he was slowly erasing my authority. But the worst part wasn't the big moments, it was the small ones. Board members would ask Marcus casual questions about the company during family gatherings, treating him like he had insights worth hearing. Employees started mentioning him in conversations, asking if he'd be joining team meetings or company retreats. I'd correct them, explain that Marcus wasn't involved in operations, but I could see the confusion in their eyes. They were getting mixed signals, and I was starting to realize that the mixed signals were intentional. Marcus himself never seemed uncomfortable with any of this. He'd show up to company events wearing expensive suits, talking about industry trends he'd read about online, accepting congratulations for successes he had nothing to do with. He'd nod along when people praised his business acumen, never once correcting them or directing credit where it belonged. During our Christmas party last year, I watched him accept a toast from our head of engineering for the successful product launch that had consumed 8 months of my life. He raised his glass and smiled like he'd earned it. The morning of the announcement, I thought it was going to be a celebration. Our Q3 numbers had just come in $23.7 million in revenue, beating projections by 18%. I'd orchestrated the biggest client acquisition in company history, landing a 3-year contract with Peterson Industries that would stabilize our cash flow for years. I walked into that boardroom expecting praise, maybe even a discussion about expanding my equity stake. Instead, I found 23 people staring at me like I was interrupting something important. My father stood at the head of the table in his navy suit, the one he wore for major announcements, and Marcus sat in what used to be my chair, the one I'd occupied during every board meeting for the past 4 years. The PowerPoint presentation was already loaded on the screen behind Dad, and I could see the title slide, Leadership Transition Plan, effective immediately. My stomach dropped before he even started talking. I remained standing because someone, I think it was Marcus, had moved my nameplate to a seat near the back of the room, next to junior executives who'd been with the company for less than 2 years. The message was clear before a single word was spoken. When Dad began explaining the transition, his voice had that rehearsed quality that comes from practicing a speech multiple times. He talked about family legacy and fresh perspectives and the importance of bringing new energy to leadership. He used phrases like sustainable growth and strategic vision, corporate speak that sounded impressive but meant nothing. The whole time, he kept glancing at Marcus with pride, the same look he used to give me when I'd solved a problem nobody else could handle. The investors were nodding along like this made perfect sense. These were people who'd watched me turn their initial investments into returns that exceeded their wildest expectations. Some of them had been in this exact room 18 months ago when I'd presented the market expansion strategy that doubled our client base. But now they sat there taking notes while my father explained how Marcus would bring innovative thinking to a company that was already innovating faster than our competitors could keep up. I felt heat crawling up my neck and spreading across my face. My hands were shaking, so I pressed them flat against my thighs under the table. When Marcus finally spoke, something about being excited for the opportunity and looking forward to building on the strong foundation, his voice was steady and confident, like he'd been preparing for this moment his entire adult life. Maybe he had been. I spent that night in my apartment, sitting on my kitchen floor with my back against the refrigerator, staring at the photo of my father and me after that first client presentation. 24-year-old me looked so hopeful, so sure that merit mattered more than genetics. I wanted to throw the picture away, but instead I just sat there tracing the frame with my finger. The worst part wasn't the betrayal itself, it was how easily everyone had accepted it. Not a single person in that room had questioned the decision. Not Maria from legal, who knew I'd written every major contract. Not David from engineering, who'd implemented systems I'd designed. Not even Janet from HR, who'd helped me build the company culture from scratch. They'd all just nodded and moved on with their lives. I called my college roommate, Patricia, around midnight. She listened while I explained what happened, and when I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Finally, she said something that cut deeper than anything my father had done. "You always knew this was a possibility. You just chose not to prepare for it." She was right. I'd poured everything into a company that would never truly be mine, no matter how much I grew it or how brilliant my strategies were. I'd been naive enough to believe that being indispensable would make me secure. But family trumps talent, and sons trump daughters, and all the quarterly reports in the world couldn't change that basic math. But sitting there on my kitchen floor, something else started stirring beneath the hurt. It was small at first, just a tiny flame of anger that I tried to ignore. I kept thinking about Marcus accepting congratulations for work he'd never done, about my father's proud smile when he introduced his son as the new CEO. I thought about 12 years of 60-hour weeks, of solved problems and averted crises and strategies that had made everyone in that room wealthier than they'd ever imagined possible. I picked up that old mechanical pencil from college and clicked it against the kitchen tile. Once, twice, 3 times. The sound was tiny in the quiet apartment, but it reminded me of every problem I'd ever solved, every challenge I'd turned into an opportunity. I wasn't done yet. My first instinct was to quit dramatically, to walk away and let them discover how much they'd underestimated my value. But that felt too much like giving up, and besides, I had a mortgage and student loans that wouldn't care about my wounded pride. So instead, I decided to stay and document everything. I started keeping detailed records of every decision Marcus made, every meeting he fumbled, every opportunity he missed. It wasn't hard, he had no idea how to run a company. Within 2 weeks, he'd canceled 3 client meetings, approved a marketing campaign that violated our brand guidelines, and asked the engineering team to build features that our system architecture couldn't support. I watched our stock price drop 4% in his first month. But documenting his failures wasn't enough. I needed leverage, something that would force the board to see what they'd done. I started reaching out to our biggest clients, conducting informal check-ins under the guise of ensuring smooth transitions. What I discovered was even worse than I'd expected. Peterson Industries was already expressing concerns about our new leadership. 2 other major clients had started taking meetings with our competitors. My first real plan was to compile all of this into a presentation for the board, complete with client feedback and financial projections showing how Marcus's inexperience was threatening our market position. I spent 3 weeks crafting the perfect argument, 60 slides of irrefutable evidence that I was the leader this company needed. The presentation was a disaster. My father let me speak for exactly 12 minutes before cutting me off, saying that growing pains were normal during leadership transitions. Marcus sat there taking notes like he was learning something valuable, not like he was being exposed as incompetent. When I showed the client feedback slides, Dad explained them away as temporary adjustment issues. When I presented the financial projections, he said quarterly fluctuations were expected. I left that meeting feeling smaller than I had since I was a child. My carefully researched evidence had been dismissed like opinion, my expertise treated like anxiety. That night, I seriously considered looking for jobs at other companies. I even started updating my resume, trying to figure out how to explain leaving the company I'd built without sounding bitter or difficult. But then something clicked. I was thinking about this all wrong. I didn't need to prove that Marcus was incompetent, I needed to let him prove it himself. And I didn't need to fight for my old position back, I needed to create a new one that was even better. The opportunity came 5 months later when Peterson Industries requested an emergency meeting about terminating their contract. Marcus had made a series of decisions that violated their compliance requirements, and they were facing potential regulatory fines because of our software. The contract termination would cost us $8.2 million and signal to the entire industry that we couldn't handle enterprise clients. I could have let it happen. Part of me wanted to watch Marcus face the consequences of his incompetence. But I also couldn't let 180 employees lose their jobs because of a family feud. So I did what I'd always done, I fixed the problem. I spent the weekend developing a compliance framework that would not only satisfy Peterson's requirements, but position us as the industry leader in regulatory software. I created a presentation that was equal parts technical solution and business strategy, showing how we could turn this crisis into a competitive advantage. Monday morning, I walked into Marcus's office and laid out the entire plan. I told him exactly what needed to be said in the Peterson meeting, which technical specifications to emphasize, and how to frame the compliance framework as a proactive innovation rather than a reactive fix. I even wrote out talking points in language he could understand and deliver convincingly. The Peterson meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. in our main conference room. At 1:45, I watched Marcus walk in carrying my presentation materials and my strategic notes. He delivered my solution flawlessly, using my words and my ideas to save the contract that his decisions had nearly destroyed. Peterson's executives were impressed. They not only kept their contract but agreed to expand it, adding an additional $3.1 million in annual revenue. After the meeting, Marcus received congratulations from the board and praise from our legal team. My father sent a company-wide email celebrating the successful crisis management and innovative thinking that had turned a potential disaster into a growth opportunity. Marcus's name was mentioned 7 times in that email. Mine wasn't mentioned at all. But this time, I was ready. I had recorded the entire conversation in Marcus's office, where I'd walked him through the solution. I had emails showing that I developed the compliance framework over the weekend. I had timestamps proving that every innovative idea in his presentation had come from my laptop. And most importantly, I had been copying several board members on strategic emails for months, building a paper trail that showed who was really running the company. The next board meeting was different. This time, I presented evidence that couldn't be explained away or dismissed. I showed them the before and after versions of the Peterson presentation, highlighting how Marcus's original approach would have guaranteed contract termination. I played excerpts from the recording where he admitted he didn't understand the regulatory requirements. I showed them client satisfaction scores under my leadership versus his, staff retention rates, and financial performance metrics that told an undeniable story. When I finished, the room was quiet for nearly 30 seconds. Then Janet from HR asked a single question that changed everything. If Marcus isn't actually running the company and Alara is still doing the strategic work, what exactly are we paying him to do? The board voted to restructure leadership roles within a week. Marcus retained the CEO title, but was reassigned to business development, a position that played to his networking strengths without requiring operational expertise. I was named Chief Operating Officer and given full authority over strategy, client relations, and day-to-day management. More importantly, my equity stake was increased to reflect my actual contribution to the company's value. It wasn't everything I'd wanted, but it was more than I dared to hope for 6 months earlier. I had real power, financial security, and the respect of our employees and clients. Marcus seemed almost relieved to step back from responsibilities he'd never wanted in the first place. My father and I didn't speak for 2 months after the restructuring. When we finally had lunch together, he looked older than I remembered, tired in a way that had nothing to do with work stress. He said he'd been trying to protect the family legacy to ensure that the company stayed in family hands. He'd never intended to hurt me, just to secure Marcus's future in a way that seemed natural and traditional. I listened to his explanation without anger, which surprised both of us. Somewhere during those months of documenting and planning and fighting for my place, I'd stopped needing his approval. I'd proven to myself that I could solve problems and lead teams and build value, regardless of what title appeared on my business cards or which chair I occupied in the boardroom. These days, I still arrive at the office early and stay late, but the work feels different. I'm not trying to prove myself anymore, I'm just doing what I'm good at. The mechanical pencil still sits on my desk, and I still click it when I'm thinking through complex problems. But now when I hear that tiny sound, I remember that the most important battles aren't fought in conference rooms or board meetings. They're fought in the quiet moments when you decide you're going to be regardless of how other people see you. 6 months ago, I thought I'd lost everything that mattered to me. I measured my worth by external validation, by titles and recognition, and the approval of people who would never see me as anything more than someone's daughter. The betrayal in that boardroom felt like the end of my story, but it was actually the beginning of a different one. I learned that you can't control how other people value your contributions, but you can control whether you continue making them. You can't force recognition, but you can build something so essential that its absence becomes obvious to everyone around you. And sometimes the best revenge isn't proving that someone else is wrong, it's proving that you're indispensable. The company is thriving now, bigger and more profitable than it's ever been. Marcus and I work well together in our new roles, and my father has started asking for my advice on strategic decisions. But the real victory isn't in the org chart or the financial statements. It's in the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you can rebuild anything that gets taken away from you. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd walked away that day, if I'd let anger and hurt drive me toward easier choices. But then I remember that the people who try to erase you are usually the ones who need you most. They just don't realize it until you stop making their lives easier and start making them impossible to ignore.